the church in general, Christians in general, have an uneasy relationship with money. And I think there's good reason for that. We've seen shipwrecks caused by money, and we've experienced the tug of that love of money that wants to pull us into making bad decisions or focusing our life on things that aren't eternal, things that aren't Christ. Money is essential as a tool in your hand, but we must never let it crawl into our hearts. And learning to use it as a tool in our hand without letting it slither into our heart is one of the great ongoing challenges for young people.
Hello, and welcome back to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, David Rethemeyer.
And I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush.
And today we have on a really fascinating guest who has some really cool insights to share with us, specifically if you are a young person or a parent of a young person who is looking to set themselves up for success in finances specifically.
We're delighted to introduce you to Trent Schrock. I met Trent a few years ago. I think we first connected over a phone call. And then Trent, as a glutton for punishment, traveled several hours at one point to meet me when I was at a convention in his general neighborhood, but it wasn't close. And we had a meal together. And really had fascinating time talking about some of the stuff that he's working on. And the things that he says, I think, are really, really important for any young person to hear. If you're the parent of a young person, this is really critical information. This is the kind of stuff that when you're here, you go, that makes sense, but what do I do with it? And then the cool thing is Trent has the next piece. This is what you do with it. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it, and it's definitely something to learn from. Trent Schrock, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm delighted to have you here. We've had some really interesting conversations in the past that were not recorded, so it's fun to have one that is recorded. So let's just start a little bit. We gave a little bit of an intro here to begin with in terms of some of the things that you do in your background, but tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to where you are now, and how did you wind up on the Be Unbound podcast?
Well, I grew up in the Midwest. I studied landscape design at the University of Illinois. About the time I finished studying, my last semester, I thought I might switch into social work, thinking maybe God had called me into that and I wanted to explore it. So I moved to a little town near Fort Wayne, Indiana, and worked at a children's home, just testing out that possibility. While I was there, I figured out I'd probably burn out in social work. So I put out my applications, got a landscape job, met my wife. Her dad was on the board at the children's home. And after we got married, we went back and worked as house parents at the children's home for a couple of years while we had our first couple children. And while there, we ran a landscape company. We ran it in a way that I'd envisioned when I had interned in Atlanta, and just had this sense of really wanting to bring meaningful work to young people. And, from that passion, we tested doing landscape with the young people from the children's home. So my original partner and I would set up the jobs. He would run the crew. We would teach principles to the kids each morning. And our ambition was to try to crack through what I see in the inner city as an opportunity drought, where there are just so many young people, so few jobs, and, where they're not really able to take on a job until they're in their mid-teens. And by then, patterns are already set. And so that was really our original ambition with our landscape company. We started that in 1997. And so we're in our 28th year or something like that. And along with our landscape company, we now have a lawn fertilization company. We have a nursery that we started with our kids when they were little. And we have very few interests. We also grow flowers for florists, which is really fun.
You're definitely concentrated on periphery stuff that you know about. I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but that strikes me as an interesting story. Years ago, I talked to somebody who's a youth pastor, and he was very frustrated with his lack of influence and ability to really change the trajectory of the lives of the kids he was serving. So he decided to do something about it. And what he did was he acquired a Chick-fil-A franchise. And people are like, wait, well, you enter that? He said, well, before I had 2 hours a week, maybe they could pay attention to me. Now, he said, I have 20 to 40 hours a week with these young people, and
Absolutely.
they have to pay attention to me because I've got a control over a paycheck. And he said, the amount of influence I have now is just far exceeds what I had as a youth pastor. And I thought that was a striking story. So you did sort of the same thing, burnout in social work, but then you end up starting a business and then serving the folks that you were originally going to help. But along the way, you and I have talked about this before, but you guys started developing a really interesting set of ideas and principles and strategies to not just help folks who were in need, but really to help anybody put themselves in a much better position to kind of start their lives, and particularly from a financial perspective. So tell me a little bit about that, how that came about, and what it is that you do in that area.
Okay, so we call it the Freedom Program.
Yeah. Which I think
And
it's an awesome name, by the way. So I love the name of that. So.
thank you. Good. We like it too. Originally, the idea came from another homeschool dad, and we were homeschoolers. We homeschooled all 5 of our kids all the way through. But at the time where we were starting our business, I had a conversation with this guy, and he was looking at his son and his nephew and just saying, they're not college material. They're not book learners. They're great young men. They're sharp young men, but they're not really geared for a college environment. And he started to look into, just the way that college works, and was determining, I think we're looking at this backward. Most people get out of college, they have debt, they go into more debt to get married, get a minivan, buy a house, etc. And so they just get behind the 8 ball, and they aren't able to save anything significant until they're in their mid 40s. And in addition to that, there are a lot of ways that you can get to a meaningful job without going through college. And I had that same feeling. Even though I had gone through college, I kept wondering, like, why did I have to pay for this? I hated having to pay for classes that I didn't want to take. I hated having to be in classes. That's a little strong. I didn't like being in classes with people who were uncommitted. And young people who weren't paying their own way were often not committed to
Right.
their education. And so I had a lot of questions about the school, about college as it was set up. And so then over the course of the next 10 years, we latched onto his ideas. We started teaching them in our business. We offered to some of our employees the opportunity to go through the program with us as mentors. He felt like it had failed. I didn't realize that until later, but both his son and his nephew had dropped out. We thought it was successful because they both landed in good paying jobs and good careers that fit their personalities and their skills. We started teaching it, and as we taught it, we reshaped it. We felt the way it was originally set, it was focused just on money. We wanted it to be focused on much more. We wanted to focus it on what we call the 5s: financial, intellectual, vocational, emotional, and spiritual freedoms. And if we were putting them in prioritized order, we do that backwards, but SEBIF is not a very good acronym, whereas 5s is easy to remember. And it does focus a lot on finances, just because young people don't really understand the impact of finances on freeing up opportunities for them later, opportunities for work, opportunities for ministry, opportunities for their family. And so we do focus a lot on finances because we want them to get that in place early in their life. And, it will speak for itself. It will answer the questions later when they get to the point where they're like, okay, now I need money. And most kids at that point, most young people at that point don't have what they need.
I think that's an interesting point because we've talked about before. You've mentioned all those, and you've said the same thing, in terms of importance. But I think you've got a bit of a niche here with the finances because I'd say first there's a colossal ignorance on finances generally, and I think our native population in our country, but also there's a misunderstanding of exactly how it works. And I think some of that comes from the fact that the rules have changed somewhat. And so we still have this lingering idea that the way to be financially solid is to be a good student, because we think academics translates to financial success, that we should get the right credentials, and then we get the right credentials that will lead to a security blanket that's a job, and that job will provide financial security. And from my perspective, none of that really is true anymore. Like none of that, and there's some aspect that may never have been completely true, but it certainly isn't now. And so this idea that I think most young people are kind of like finances is something that will happen later. that I'll figure finances out once I start to make a lot of money. And I think you say something that's really obvious upon reflection, but is not obvious in terms of the way people look at this, which is, the earlier you start, the better things are going to be here. So you should start as early as possible. So talk about that a little bit, because I'd like to know, if you get a chance here to talk to 50,000 young people and you want to say, hey, this financial piece is more important than you think. I think that the young person's reaction to that initially is like, oh, great, one more thing that I've got to figure out. And yet you've got a really powerful point that, figure this out and a lot of other things will be a lot easier. So what would be some of those things? What would be some of those things that you'd say, hey, you really need to know this if you're going to think wisely about your financial future?
Yes, awesome. Well, I will jump first to starting with, I think the church in general and Christians in general have an uneasy relationship with money. And I think there's good reason for that. We've seen shipwrecks caused by money, and we've experienced the tug of that love of money that wants to pull us into making bad decisions or focusing our life on things that aren't eternal, on things that aren't Christ. And so I think the constant challenge for a young person, a young Christian, is to learn to see that money is like oxygen. It's comes and goes in your lungs. It's important for exchange. It's important for the function of your body. Money is important for the function of your home, your family, the dreams that are placed in front of you, the dreams God puts on your heart. And so the idea that we try to communicate is money is essential as a tool in your hand, but we must never let it crawl into our hearts. And learning to use it as a tool in our hand without letting it slither into our heart is one of the great ongoing challenges for young people. So that being said, if we can confront that uneasiness, and not every young person deals with that, but a lot do. So let's confront that first. But then if you just look at the math, if someone begins saving early, they have an opportunity for their money to double and double and double again before most people start saving in their mid 40s. And so those who start saving in their mid 40s miss out on that early multiplication. And I could show people numbers, a bunch of different ways that young people can become multimillionaires in everyday paying jobs. We have within our business presently 10 Freedom Program kids out of our 20 full-time, 30 plus summer staff. We have 10 of them are Freedom Program kids. And these are kids who are hitting their targets of $80,000 of savings and investment, $100,000 of savings and investments by the time that they're 22, same time their companions are graduating from college.
That is a fantastic claim. Like I've heard it before, so that makes a little bit more sense to me. But I just wanted you to back up, because I think if I'm listening to this for the first time, I'm screaming at the phone or whatever I'm listening on, saying, "Wait a second, hold it, back that up again." So you said you've got folks working for you on your summer staff in the Freedom Program who are going to have $80,000 to $100,000 in savings or in cash on hand by the time they're 22. And I think almost anybody listening says, what kind of students do you have? Independently wealthy students, students doing phenomenal career stuff. And yet you just said working a normal job. So back up a little bit and explain how that works.
Okay.
What is going on that you have students that are in that situation?
Sure. Okay. So first of all, it's not the summer staff. It's although summer staff benefit from, but it's our full-time staff.
Full-time staff. My apologies.
Graduated high school and they come in and they work full-time for us. And they'll earn, if you take your hourly wage, let's say it's $12 an hour. If you work 2,000 hours a year, which is considered full-time, you'll make $24,000 a year. You can do the math. Just take that $12 an hour, double it, add 1,000. And so that's what it is. So 12 times 2, 24,000 a year. But if you work more than that, if you work overtime, you can push that up to 27, 30,000 a year. So our young people coming out of high school, they're making, $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 a year. By the time they're 22 years old, they've grown into management positions, and they're probably making mid 30s to mid 40s. And so those aren't crazy high paying jobs. But an important thing to bear in mind for young people is that if you come out of college with average debt, you have average consumer debt, average college debt, average car debt, not even counting house, average consumer car and college debt, you need to make $70,000 a year to have the same purchasing power left over after you service your debt as a young person with no debt who makes $38,000 a year. And so 38 is powerful, especially because one of the key principles is that we really teach, one of the key tenets of the Freedom Program is to learn to play great defense and not just live within your budget, but live so far within your budget that you can save in big chunks. And so by the time that young person is 22, working in a $25 to $35 to $40,000 a year job, playing great defense, they have $5,000 in an emergency fund, so they never have to go into consumer debt. And obviously that can increase as they need to, as their life demands. Number two, they have $15,000 in what we call their car cycle. It's not just savings, it's also their car value, because we always want to know what you could trade it in or sell it for. That's value that they've earned. We want them to see that it depreciates, but also if they purchase a sweet spot car, which is something we teach in our books and something we teach the kids, you buy it at the best time so that it depreciates the least, you get the most life out of it, and it's the least costly time of ownership in a car. If you say your car is worth $7,000, you have $8,000 in savings. If your car drops to $6,000, you just top off your savings so that you're always at that 15. So you can always go and buy another car without ever having to go into debt. So you don't have to go into car debt. The car debt, that one thing, I just want to take a rabbit trail on that alone. That can make a difference of $2.8 million if you only buy sweet spot cars through the rest of your life until you're 81 and your kids take away your keys, versus, and then you invest the difference between what you're saving on a regular basis and what the average car payment is in the US, just the average car payment in the US. And the numbers are getting better and more hopeful for Freedom Program kids because the interest rates are going up. And so it looks worse and worse for people who borrow for cars. And it really tips that equation. So $5,000 in a emergency fund, $15,000 in their car fund. By the time they're 22, we want them to have set up their own IRA and have $20,000 set aside. And that we show multiple ways in our books how that $20,000 becomes millions of dollars by the time they're at retirement age. And because of the doublings that take place, between retirement and, mid 70s, 80s, it goes to mind-blowing numbers, just numbers that you think, how is that even possible? And this is just for a kid who's put $20,000 into their IRA. And if you do the math, then 20, 15, 5, that's $40,000. That leaves between $40,000 and $60,000, depending on where they set their target and what they hit. It leaves between $40,000 and $60,000 for them to take the edge off of the next stage of their life, which just happens to be the most expensive stage of our lives in comparison to our income. When we're trying to start a family, when we're trying to buy a house, when we're needing to get into a family type vehicle, we just have all these expenses that come our way that we have to handle. And so it helps take the edge. Down payment on a house, money for a ring, helps you not have to make as much. So it gives you more vocational freedom. And so, yeah, it's a big impact.
So I think that if we're listening to this and saying, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And I think, by the way, I'm glad you took the rabbit trail. I think the commentary on the car fund is a big deal. I've been actually fiddling around recently with trying to figure out what a cost per mile number would be, because I think that so many people make decisions in the immediate moment, buying a car, nice car, whatever. And I think it's, it gives you a little bit of a perspective if you can figure out, I did some math recently, and at the moment I have older cars, which I bought used, and then I tend to drive them until they don't have any resale value. But I had one that kind of gave up the ghost. And when I figured up what it was like 0.000, there's 4 zeros, 0.0009 cents, no, 4 cents, 0.0004 cents a mile is what I ended up paying for it on repairs. I paid cash for it. And then when you just averaged out the additional cost, and, that was kind of like, oh, I feel a little better about the fact that we had it had an unfortunate encounter with a deer and ended its life. And so, but when you realize what we got out of it was pretty amazing. But I think that there's still a question. So, Okay, so I'm making $35,000. And by the way, I think your numbers make sense. So you're saying $12 an hour, either you work overtime or you get a better paying job. And assuming that you're all in on your job, most people can step up in that. So, okay, so I'm earning $12 an hour. I'm making $35,000. How is it that you're helping somebody to set up, funds that put $30,000 in an IRA and $15,000 in a car fund and $5,000? You talked about playing good defense. So is this primarily a budgeting system? There's lots of people out there, frankly, who are making $35,000 and they're not set up at 22 with this kind of money.
Right.
So what is the main thing that you're teaching students in the Freedom Program that sets them apart from other people making similar money?
Well, again, I want to take a little rabbit trail to begin and just say that when we talk about the Freedom Program, we introduce it as a self-motivated parent and mentor directed or mentor guided program. And it is a 12-step program. And one of those steps is to play great defense. And another is to start saving. And another is to start investing. So those are part of the steps that the program walks them through, or their coach walks them through, that I, as coach of the Paragon our landscape company, that I, as the coach of our landscape employees, walk them through. We are giving them the instructions on what to do, but it is the kids who are making it happen.
Mhm.
And a real quick comment about the kids: they tend to love work. They tend to start the program already having about $7,000 to $11,000 somewhere in there when they graduate high school and they start the program. And to me, that's just a mark of young people who already get the notion of saving. They already are comfortable with work. Many of them started working as soon as they possibly could. Many of them learned their work ethic from parents and grandparents and weren't afraid of work. And so by being unafraid of work, by getting a job, not only does it teach you these great things about life, these great things about yourself, these great things about people, but it also gives you this cash flow, this stream of income. And from that, you can start to either spend it or save it. But if they're playing great defense and they have in their mind, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to set it aside. I need to fill this emergency fund. I need to fill this car fund. I need to start saving for my future. That's got to come from them. That motivation has to come from the kids. And so I do think it's a certain type of kid that succeeds in the program. And yet what's interesting is, once my oldest son went through the program, all the rest of my kids followed because they had a model. And
Mhm.
not all of them are the crazy frugal person like him. Once another of our young people went through the program, two of his sisters have followed in the course, and they're both in the program right now. They're both right on target. One is going to graduate probably in February, and the other one is just tipping past her second year. And so I think if they see a model, then it's easier for them to make that commitment and to understand, hey, I can still have a life. This is a great way to learn. If you look at it, by the way, the program in the spectrum of education, there's a college path to a career. There's an apprentice path to a career. This is a work path to a career. And we believe, especially if you're intentional, that you can make tremendous growth, that you can find a meaningful career. And we talk about this all the time in our workbooks. We talk about this all the time in our lessons. We talk about this on our website like crazy. We want to help people get to meaningful work. And so, that's the target. We don't want them just to come out with a lump of savings. We want them to have freedom in the other areas of their life as well.
So I think I'm hearing there's almost three elements here. The first is a vision and an excitement about work, and to instill in somebody like, hey, this is whatever you're doing here is a very meaningful thing. So first of all, let's be really clear. Nobody gets rich just by thinking about it. You have to put effort in, and so in this case, it's effort. In your case, with landscape company, it's sweat. It's physical labor, right? So it's labor first. Secondly, you used the phrase "good defense." So obviously, it's about thinking about limiting your expenses and exercising some discipline. I don't know that from discussions I've had with you in the past, I don't know that this is an austerity program, meaning that you never can use money for anything fun. Instead,
Right.
it's more of a discipline program. But it sounds to me like the big part is a vision. And so if you take somebody and you say, look, if you're willing to work hard and be disciplined, then I'm going to instill in you a vision for something better. And I'm also, I think this is the part that strikes me as pretty interesting. You've sprinkled some really interesting pieces of information here that I think add to that vision. Hey, if you had $15,000 in a rolling fund, you never have to worry about transportation again. That's a pretty compelling vision, right? If you put $30,000 in this fund by the time you're 22, you don't have to worry about retirement. Well, that's a lot of freedom then to make decisions based on how you think you can best serve the world rather than having to figure about, your retirement. That's a pretty compelling vision. But I also think things like, hey, the first part of your life is actually going to be the most expensive part of your life. I think that's particularly powerful now because if anybody's paying attention, the cultural message right now is, hey, young person, forget about home ownership. It's not going to happen. There's no way you're going to be able to afford a house. And yet, I hear you saying, I mean, the numbers you're pitching around, I think most of your young people are likely in really good positions to be able to think about making down payments for homes and doing those kinds of things. So I think that's pretty exciting that, at some level, this is not deeply technical, super secret stuff, but this is a comprehensive system of vision, hard work, and understanding and exercising some discipline. In that, work is obviously a big factor. So you said three things there. There's an apprentice path to work. I think people sort of understand that. I'm going to go and work for the electrician and eventually get my electrician's license and do that. There's a college route to work, and anybody who's listening to this podcast already knows what we think about some of those things. And then you said there's a work path to work. Talk about what you mean by that third one, because I think that's the one that most people scratch their heads and say, exactly, what is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm super passionate about it because I'm 54 years old. As I look back on my life, I can remember the very first job I had working for my grandma when I was 5 years old. She had a little series of jobs that when you're five, you get to do this, and then you get grandma's lunch, and which was awesome. The lunch was far more than anything else, and it kept bringing us back. And then when you turn 7, you get this little bigger responsibility, and 9. And so, my grandparents had a tremendous amount to do with building my work ethic. I grew up in a small community, town of about 500, surrounded by farms. There were more farmers and small business people and landlords and such that needed help with their jobs than there were young people to fulfill those needs. And so I could work a bunch of different places. I got a lot of different work experiences as a young person. And at 54, I'm still tapping back into those. I'm still going, oh, wow. So that's what was going on. Or I remember I experienced this. So what we're trying to encourage young people to do, 2 of the steps, it is a 12-step program, by the way. How trite is that? It's a 12-step program, but 2 of the steps are, number 1, get a primary job, work as long in that job as you can. Try to work in that job all 4 years so you can grow as far as you can. Grow up into management, learn management skills, and, just grow your wage in that one place. And then the second thing is get other jobs. Your college companions are studying crazy late. They're studying on weekends. I know there's fun time in there too, but they're putting in a lot of energy and work into their education, those who are taking it seriously. Why not do that same thing with your work? So get a second job and switch between those second jobs so you get a view into a lot of different companies. And what happens is you're building this framework, this reservoir underneath the ground that later you will tap into in ways you can't even imagine right now. Like, it's going to enrich your life in the future. You're going to learn and grow from those things, even when all you think you're doing is going into work and putting in the hours. Having said that, if you're intentional, it is amazing what you can learn while you're on a job. You can learn how this particular company trains their managers. You can learn how this one brings in and orients their new employees. You can learn how coworker conflicts take place and how they're resolved. You can see bad examples and good examples, and you can learn from both. You can be paid this amount for here and this amount for there, and you can evaluate which was worth it for me. You also have this tremendous thing happen. Like we talk about the work path to work, or I would say work path to career, work path to meaningful career. Within your work, you find things you're good at and things you enjoy. And you will grow fastest in those 2 things. And once a young person realizes how things they're good at and things they enjoy, that they're now starting to become capable in those skills. Once they realize how those things can help people, or help the planet, say a veterinarian helping God's creation, or an ecologist working in the environment. Once people realize how the things they enjoy and the things they're good at can help people, sparks fly, and all kinds of options open for them to explore. I could do this for a career. I could do this for a career. I could do this because now I've learned how to find meaning in whatever I do. And that's how you have people who are, sewer engineers, or you have people who are mechanics, and you have people who are unafraid of all the dirty jobs that Mike Rowe can throw at them. And they're happy in that place because they've learned how it's helping people. They have a deeper purpose to what they're doing.
Well, thank you. I met Trent a couple years ago. He pitched me some pieces of this freedom program, and I just thought this is exactly the kind of thing that people need to understand. And that trifecta of, first of all, having a vision, secondly, an appreciation for work, and then the discipline to be able to translate the gains that you have from work into meaningful progress towards the vision. That's the building blocks for accomplishing anything. And so, look, if you, as a young person, do this, or as a parent of a young person, if you can help a young person do this, first of all, it's a tremendous financial boost, and so that's in and of itself is good enough. But there's something even more powerful here, which is learning to do this is the building blocks of learning to be successful anywhere. And if you've been listening to this podcast, success is not a word that we like to necessarily use. I would say it's a recipe to be impactful anywhere. In other words, we're not interested in success, so that means getting rich, famous, or powerful. But if we're talking about to thrive, to be able to contribute to their community, to be able to live a rich and fulfilling life, to be able to make a difference in the world, this is the building blocks for this as well. So,
Yes.
Trent, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, the expertise you put into this. And we'll have links to everything that Trent does in the show notes, but we really just endorse what he's doing, and I invite you to check it out and to learn more about Trent, the work that he's doing, especially with the Freedom Project. And thanks for your time. We really appreciate you being here.
Hey, you bet. Thank you so much. It's been a delight. And I would just like to say what you guys are doing at Unbound is inspiring. You're many miles down the path ahead of us in inspiring and training young people how to make this transition. It can often be a difficult transition. I think you guys do that exceptionally well, and I find your work inspiring.
Well, thanks. That is a heavy compliment, and coming from you, we take that to heart and very much appreciate it. So thanks a lot, Trent.
You bet.
Well, David, I appreciated that conversation. I'm really fascinated by what Trent does. And for those of you listening, I want to just kind of pull the curtain back a little bit and say, in some ways, what Trent is doing is kind of a competitor to Unbound. And I say that unabashedly and honestly would be delighted if some of you checked out the program and actually ended up enrolling in that. And if that sounds a little bit odd, here's the deal. There's an entire mega industrial complex around higher education out there that is capturing 99% of the market or something ridiculous. And, if you've been listening to us for a while, we're unabashedly saying that while there are exceptions, and those exceptions are important, there's a whole lot of people losing time, losing money, and getting bad ideas instilled in them through this whole complex. And honestly, we're way more passionate about putting people in a better route than we are capturing 100% of the market ourselves. And so folks like things that Trent's doing, and we're working together in a few projects, and we're mutually beneficial to each other. But honestly, I'd love to see Trent and Freedom Project thrive and grow. And what he does is not quite the same as what Unbound does. And that means for some of you, that's going to be an absolutely perfect match. And it's going to be far better than the other opportunities that you're looking at, right? And so I just want to kind of just be straight up honest and say, some of you are going to be choosing between Unbound and Freedom Project. And I'm just encouraging you, go look at the show notes here, find the Freedom Project, look at it, take a good hard look at it. And if that's the right match for you, Trent and his team do some really awesome stuff. And we're really excited about what they're doing. We're really delighted to kind of let you know about it. And if nothing else, just pay attention to what he said about that trifecta there. If you are willing to understand the importance of work, if you're willing to have the discipline to do the kind of things that you need to do with the money that you generate, and you have a vision for where that money ought to go, it is transformative.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that. And I think it's just really cool to see how both Unbound and the Freedom Project, really their goal is to set young people up for real impactful success. And kind of like what you talked about here in the show earlier is that it's not the kind of success that the 99% of people who are going to colleges are hoping for that's ultimately going to let them down once they get it or they fail to get it, whatever the case may be. We're talking about the kind of success that allows a young person to go into adulthood with confidence and with hope and with security, knowing that they're moving on a path forward that's going to get them to places that is going to honor God and be able to have thriving relationships and community. So, yeah, I think both of our programs are great fits for that. It's just we happen to focus on a couple of little different areas. So, depending on what your bent is, you might check out the Freedom Project, or you might check out Unbound and what we have to offer.
And if you are interested in Unbound, go to beunbound.us. If when you're listening to this, we will be close to the end of our enrollment season for both our high school programs and for our post-high school programs. So that would be Declare, Equipped, and Explore in our high school arena and the Ascend program in our post-high school area. And we're getting down towards the end. So if you do not have a plan for what you're doing this fall, or if you do, and we might be able to change your mind to something better, then go to beunbound.us. I think by the time this airs, if you hurry, and you will have to hurry, you will almost be able to still enroll and make our first event. And it's not that you have to make the first event to be able to enroll for the year, but it does make the year go a lot easier if you get in time to go to Apex. We were working on some last minute Apex details this morning in our staff meeting. We've had a few last minute Apex quirks, which always happens. And so it's almost kind of nice to have them come out of the woodwork and be like, oh, that's the problem we're going to have to work with this year. And we got the big ones resolved already. And that means we're really close to the kickoff of our whole year. Very excited about Ascend for sure, but very excited about Apex. And if you are enrolled, or if you're somebody that's already associated alumni coming back, we will see you in a few short weeks. And we're very much looking forward to it. So until then, or until we meet each other again on this podcast, we will challenge you to be unbound and think about some freedom.